video we are going to talk about today, which is defining requirements for automations, it really is an art form. You give the computer crappy instructions, computer's going to do crappy stuff. Sorry to interrupt myself and you and I on this adventure to learn something new, but I just needed to stop us for a second and say, if you love this content and if you found it helpful, I have an entire collection of awesome stuff that if you stick around to the end of this video, I'll tell you exactly how to gain access to that. It's basically just stuff I can't share on YouTube. There's a ton of free asset downloads as well as some thought exercises to help you optimize your Salesforce CRM. Now, back to our regularly scheduled programming. Welcome back to Sales to the Force. My name is Alyssa Schaefer. If you're new, welcome. If you are old, welcome. Anyway, this is a channel that is, I'm a senior Salesforce consultant and I am on a mission, people. I am on a mission to bridge the gap between Salesforce consultants and people that need Salesforce consultants. I'm not saying that when I work with clients, they sit there and go, well, what do you even do? Because partly what I do is I speak in a language that they have no idea what I'm talking about. So it's really clear that they need my help. But the problem is since we're not speaking the same language, nobody actually knows how to come to the table and go fast because they don't know how to ask for what they really need. And it takes a consultant a minute to either explain it so that they're answering the right questions. It is an art form. The video we are going to talk about today, which is defining requirements for automations, it really is an art form, digging those requirements out of people because nobody knows what requirements even are for an automation, how to think about them. And as a consultant, me explaining that to you when you're on my company's dime, that's expensive. Those are expensive lessons. And so my mission is to bring this information to the marketplace. You know why? It's going to make my job easier. It's going to make me be able to go faster because guess what? I'm not going to have to explain what consulting is before we consult. So this video series, it's 3 parts. For building automations. So the last video, which I can link in the description, it was about understanding just simply what automation is. What are the components of an automation and how to think about those so that when you're designing, like what we're going to do in this video, when you're designing or defining automation requirements, you can go faster because you already know the components and you already know how to think about it, because in order to build a bulletproof automation, you have many steps, many layers, and depending on how complex it is, the more complex it is, the bigger hindsight moment you're going to have where you go, oh, and I got to tell you, it's not the computer's fault. You told the computer to do that. The computer is just simply listening. So if you give the computer crappy instructions, computer's going to do crappy stuff. So I've been alluding to this story, and I think I'm going to save it for part 3, but I have this client horror story about automation doing exactly what you tell it to do, except what you told it to do is terrible and did bad things. And the problem with automation is people think automation is their end all be all, but the problem is if you build a bad automation, that can actively work against you in also the sense that you don't know because it's automatically happening. The computer doesn't go, oh, hey, by the way, maybe you didn't mean to do that. That's not what a computer does. You told the computer to do it. They just did it. The computers are more like, aye, Captain. While that's great because they don't talk back to you, my boss knows I'm the worst because I don't just say, aye, Captain. I say, ooh, I see lots of holes in that plan. So, it's not the best. It's not your favorite person at work, but the person raising those questions might be the person that saves your butt later. So, without further ado, let's dive into this. I should also add my usual disclaimer that I'm a Salesforce consultant for a company. This is not about me, this is not about my work. This is what I want to do to Sorry if you can hear that. This is something that I want to do to bring this information to the marketplace so that everybody understands not only what Salesforce consultants even do, but how to work with them so that you can get the bang for your buck faster. Because I can promise you, I have seen tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars wasted because people did not understand how to utilize Salesforce consultants. Not to mention, not all Salesforce consultants are created equal. So I don't think I have to tell you that, because if everybody was really great at their jobs, there really wouldn't be we wouldn't be having this conversation, and nobody, like, the world would be super boring. So with that being said, let's dive into the second video on the tips and tricks for designing and defining automation requirements. Okay, so sorry for the jackhammer in the background, trying to avoid it. Yeah, it's almost like they don't care that I'm trying to record videos for you guys. But anyway, take two. Okay, so in this video, we are going to talk about the 3 tips on how to define and determine what your automation requirements, and it's, for me, I can't, sight unseen tell you exactly what to build for the automation, but I can tell you how to think about it so that you can approach designing your automation with the best possible arsenal. Because I will say, hindsight is clear as day 2020, and I will tell you, I have seen some of the biggest hindsight bitch slaps on the planet. On the way in, you're like, yeah, it looks good, oh, it works, and then you forget about when it doesn't work, and that screws you. I have seen some fabulous examples of this. So, without further ado, these are my 3 tips for how to think about automation requirements before you build your automation and then implement it in your world, because guess what? Hindsight being 2020, while visually clear, sometimes really sucks. So without further ado, let's dive into these 3 tips. Oh, and I also should mention, let's quickly recap the 3 parts of an automation, the 3 components of an automation. 1, the trigger, meaning the action that creates the automation to even run in the first place. 2, criteria. What do we do in what circumstance? There might be, scenario A, scenario B, scenario C, and you're going to need to define what to do in each of those scenarios. And this video is to help you with what I called surprise scenario D that nobody thought about on the front end. So the third piece being outcome, meaning when it's scenario A, do this. When it's scenario B, do that. If it's scenario C, do this. And to be honest with you, for surprise scenario D, meaning that, say that you're like, I don't really know what scenario D is going to be, but I need a way to just opt out so this doesn't even run. If it's in that category, then you can create a way so that if it's scenario A, do this, scenario B, do that, scenario C, do this other thing, and for scenario D, do nothing but tell me about it so I do something. That's my infamous opt-out method. So with that being said, let's talk about my 3 tips for how to think about automation so that you can define and design requirements that are actually going to serve you and not create bigger problems later. And I'm going to save my horror story for video 3, which is about how to test an automation. So tip number 1 is, when you're building automation, you build it for the 95% of the time. So have you ever heard, it's mostly like, for me, it brings me to grammar, but it's like, oh no, that's the exception, not the rule. So I don't know, I'm thinking about I before E, except after C, and then they were like, except in this circumstance, or like whatever. I think about grammar mostly when I think about exceptions and rules. However, there's probably more. It's just where my brain immediately goes. So, but here I call it the 95-5. So what I'm really saying is that you're building your automation for the 95% of the time, right? When you're thinking about automation, it's what I call forward thinking. You think about all the scenarios you know about, all of the circumstances you commonly come across, and you're defining your requirements forward. You're defining your requirements from the lens of the 95% of scenarios. If you're finding that you have 5% of the time it does that, 5% of the time it does that, 5% of the time it does that, automation may not be the answer to your problem because that could potentially be you building 20 different automations. What I need you to do is think about 95% of the time what happens and how can you make those 95% of the times go faster. But the reason we call it 95.5 is because there is also 5% of the time. And these are the exceptions, not the rule. And so the tip and trick here is to challenge yourself to define 95% of the time, and then challenge yourself to come up with the 5%. Now, there's sometimes where you think, oh, wow, this automation, something as simple as automatically naming contracts, automatically naming requirements, automatically naming anything. And you kind of think like, oh, there never could be a reason why this automation wouldn't apply to 100% of the time. And I just, hindsight's 20/20. So I would encourage you to think about that 5. Think about any exception, any reason. Could be small, could be large, could be unknown. Ask somebody else. Because also, if you're not doing this with somebody else, if you're not building automation, if you're new to this and you're not building automation with either somebody who's an automation specialist from, say, the Salesforce side, or even in-house, somebody who is a specialist on the workflow you're designing automation for, I can promise you there are things that you're gonna miss. So, jackhammer in the background. Hopefully you can't hear that. So that is the 95.5 rule. I need you to think about the 95% of the time when these rules mostly apply, and I need you to think about that 5% of the time when you're in the exception, not the rule, because you can build automation to opt out for that 5% of the time. So something else happens for that 5% of the time. But if you don't think about the 5% before you build the automation, your automation for that 5% of the time is going to really mess things up, because it's going to go, oh, I need to just do that. And for that 5% of the time, chances are you don't want it to do that. So, sorry for the vague terms, but you got to apply like your specific circumstance here. So it's just a challenge. I challenge you to come up with what happens that 5% of the time that you're not thinking about. And if you can't come up with it, then you need to either talk to the person who is building the automation, because they will ask you the right question to get that answer, or you ask the person who does the workflow the most often, because they are going to know what that 5% is, probably right off the bat, and save you a bunch of time having to come up with it yourself. But that's neither here nor there. And also kind of oh, that's a good video. I should make that one about user surveys. Yeah. So anyway, that'll be coming soon to a video near you. Okay, so that's rule number 1 about defining automation requirements, the 95.5 rule. The next one is about thinking forwards and backwards. So I did say in the 95.5 rule that you're thinking about that 95% of the time and you're thinking about it forward. So the other part of an automation is you have to think about what it looks like when you're going forward and what it looks like if you need to revert back. So, for instance, say that this would not be a great scenario, but say that you closed won an opportunity and then all of a sudden the client says, oh, I want to add this extra thing, right? So you went through the whole process of selling the contract or whatever, and then they come back and they're like, oh, I got to change all this stuff. So not only do you want an automation that's the example I've been using, is automatically creating that contract. Not only do you want the automation that way, but if somebody says, oh, well, now I'm going to change it, you also need to have a way to undo it. At the very least, you're not going to want to like delete it and start over and all that stuff. So you just build it thinking through forwards and backwards. Say we're still in the opportunity, right? So like when you're in the scoping stage, if you go back from the negotiation to scoping, something obviously, if there's an automation in there, something obviously changed about the opportunity that will affect the automation. Now, sometimes it could do it on its own. Say you're adding another item to the scope. So then the negotiation, the price automatically gets updated. Okay, fine. You don't have to do anything in terms of making your automation account for that. Say you define requirements with a client, but you require your client to sign off on all of those requirements before anything happens. So if you're going back in time, making a new requirement part of the new scope, then that means that, I need to get it signed off. So you can't go into negotiations without getting all of the scope signed off. So that means that you thinking backwards. So if you're going back in time, you can't just go forward again because you got to get every single scope piece signed off by your client. Now that's just a really flippant example that I was just came up with on the top of my head, but it's the same idea. You have to think about, if you have an automation going this way, what happens if somebody has to backtrack and then go forward again? What needs to be undone in order to be able to go forward again? So again, this is a way to think about it. It may not apply. Say you go backwards and you're like, well, nothing's going to change. Okay, but I can promise you, as long as you're thinking about that every single time, if this is the 95-5 rule, 5% of the time you're going to need to do something, right? That's the exception, not the rule. So every single time you think about building an automation, you have to think through that lens to make sure that you account for that scenario. And again, like I said, if you're having trouble thinking through this, and even what I'm talking about, you're like, wow, that was really complicated, I don't even know what to do with that, then you need somebody like me or somebody like me who can help you think through all the different scenarios, not through your context, but through the context of automation building and how that works. Or you talk to the person who does that workflow that you're trying to automate, because guaranteed that person is going to be able to help you define what needs to be undone if they're going backwards, or what needs to be, there's insert scenario here. So these are just rules of the road, how to think about stuff. Not necessarily hard and fast rules. They don't apply to every single scenario, but if you don't think through this lens at all, then you are going to forget stuff. So rule number 1, 95-5. What are the exceptions? What are the rules? What is the most common thing that's happening? And is there a special scenario D where the rules just don't apply? And how do we account for that? That's the automations can account for things that shouldn't happen too. So that's the 95-5 rule. The second one is thinking forwards and backwards. So if somebody goes forward, the automation runs and the thing happens, what happens if it needs to go backwards again? Does something need to be undone? Does something need to be done again? Is there anything that needs to be changed because of the fact that the automation that already ran is going backwards? The stages are going backwards. The answer may not be yes, like I said, but at least asking that question is going to get you so much closer to making sure that your automation is not going to hurt you in the end. So that's rule number 1 and rule number 2. Rule number 3 is building with the end in mind. Now, I've brought this up a few times on a few videos on this channel, and I find that when it comes to design of any piece of a CRM, whether it be Salesforce or anything else, that folks design for today and tomorrow, and then they forget to think about 3 years from now. And obviously, if you're in business, the hope is that you're in business for a long time. So I'm not speaking to people being like, oh, well, why aren't you thinking about a decade from now? And they're like, oh, a decade doesn't apply to me. I don't want to be in business that long. No, everybody wants to be in business for that long. So I'm not saying that you have to design something in 10 years, but you have to make sure what you are designing is not going to hurt you in 10 years. So I'm going to give you an example of one of my clients. So, and obviously every time I use any of my clients as examples, I do not name clients. I do not name companies of clients. Don't ask, I won't tell you. The point is, I am trying to depict scenarios that could apply to you. At the very least, I've seen it in lots of different lenses. So really, I'm just trying to share information so that you can make better decisions and really understand what it means to design something not just for today and tomorrow, but for in a decade from now. So I had a client that had a community, and they designed their all of their profiles for, so thinking, let's call it a portal, right? So if you have a client portal, meaning somebody goes to a page, they put in a username, they put in a password, and it's a guarded portal that has your information on the other side. So, this client had something like that. So what they, back when it was designed, before, let's just say when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, because how it was designed was very much the current methodology of that time, right? They did not think about, and not that they would have known, but they did not consider how things would grow and change later. So the end result of this, without me getting into some serious technobabble where everyone's gonna like zone out, is they hard-coded what they needed into this portal, meaning that the automation they built and the client community, the client portal, are hard-coded together, meaning that you can't change either of these without breaking the entire thing. So, some of you might be thinking, well, I don't even see how that could be avoided. I'm not saying you can avoid problems like this. What I am saying, though, is that if you're designing any sort of automation and you're not even considering what's with the end in mind, I can just promise you that you will come up with a scenario where in order to rebuild something, you'd have to tear down your first version. So, what's an easy example of this? Okay, so I had a client that, there's a couple different ways to, grant permissions. So you have profiles and you have permission sets. Now, the general idea is you're using both, because you'd have foundational permissions that go into the profile, and then permission sets would be like extra permissions. So the client that I was working with had basically built all of their permissions into the profiles, which is not a huge problem, but then they were like, well, we need this person and that person to be able to do two different things. And I was like, well, you only have one profile, so these two people can do the same thing. Is there another profile we can give? No, they need this profile. Okay, so if this person needs to be able to do that, and this person needs to be able to do that, and you don't want them to be able to do the other thing, then we need a way to differentiate. And so, this was, my job, explaining why what I'm saying is relevant and how it applies to that circumstance. But whoever built that design did not think about the fact that they could eventually have two different people in the same role with the same profile needing different permission sets, meaning that this person can do this and that person can do that, and then they can't do each other's thing, or whatever the scenario is. I don't really care. I've seen it all. But the point is that this is the concept of designing with the end in mind, meaning that you are at least not making it so it can't be changed later. When things are hard-coded, you are essentially saying this is never going to change. Now, there are scenarios where you can hard-code things, because unless you're adding a completely additional function to it, this is how it's going to work. Like, I had a few, in a project I just did, there were a few fields that needed to calculate, and I was like, well, those are always going to need to keep calculating those things. No criteria, they just need to keep calculating, and it's always going to be that and that. And that was it. It was pretty simple. And it was, so it's hard-coded logic. It's going to be hard to undo later, so going to, we'll see if it stands the test of time. It's done good so far. But the point is that when you build hard-coded information into your CRM, then or hard-coded logic, any sort of automation, anything, you're putting yourself at risk to needing to spend literally equal the amount of money, if not more, to undo what you did. So I kept saying, like, having access to somebody who is a Salesforce consultant to be able to bounce ideas off of is extremely valuable, especially in situations like this, because it's not just the aspect that, like, we understand Salesforce. It's also this third-party observer kind of where you in your business, you're like really emotionally invested in the outcome and how everything's going, and the fact that you're spending this money, like, you're very emotionally invested. And I don't think I have to convince anybody that emotion and business don't actually mix very well. Not to say that you can't be emotional, everybody's human. But the point is, if you're only thinking through emotion, automation doesn't care about emotion. Automation only cares about logic. So if you are making any sort of decision about automation without considering the end in mind because you're being overwhelmed by current circumstance emotions, your automation isn't going to work, or it's going to bite you in the ass later with this whole aspect of hindsight. So with that being said, this is video number 2 out of 3 for building automations, and this one is about defining and designing automation requirements. So I hope this has served you in any way, shape, or form, because some of these rules you may have understood. Like, some of these rules, you're like, oh my God, that was so helpful. Some of the other rules, you can be like, well, I don't really think that applies to me. It's going to apply to you later when you're like, oh, that's what that meant. But with that being said, I am a DIYer, so I am hoping that by at least making these videos, anybody out there that is trying to just do this themselves can at least be off to a better start. But the reason I have job security is because, and the reason I have job security within the world of Salesforce as a Salesforce consultant is because Salesforce is a blank slate of development to be made. It doesn't actually have to follow any sort of rhyme or reason, and no, best practice is not all practice. One size does not fit all. So I can sleep well at night to know that the world will always need Salesforce consultants to help along the way. So with that being said, I hope this has served you. If it has, there's a button like this. I would love for you to push it. And also subscribe if, I'll be posting videos like this on this channel all the time, because I am on a mission to bridge the gap between Salesforce. I used to call myself the wizard behind the curtain. I'm pulling the curtain back. I want everybody to be able to see what this does, why it is valuable, and why working with a Salesforce consultant can save you not only time, money, hair from pulling it out, and all those good things. So I will see you on the 3rd video. You're not gonna want to miss the tips and tricks on how to make your automation bulletproof. So I'll see you there. Thanks again for watching and joining me on my mission to create some blatantly honest Salesforce consulting content. I'm making this not only for aspiring Salesforce consultants that want to learn what it's like, but also somebody shopping around for a Salesforce consultant. If you want to know what to look for, then you can't miss out on these videos. And if you're also in the boat where you're like, what would it even be like to work with a Salesforce consultant? What could they even provide me? Then all of these videos are for you. And there are a ton of free videos on YouTube. But before you sign up to pay a consultant $30 to $100K to help you along your Salesforce journey, I highly recommend that you gain access to this free Salesforce Captain membership site so that you can be empowered with some information before you're put in that really tough decision that you're going to have to make. As promised, here are the instructions for how you gain access to this free site. I also would like to put in a disclaimer side note that because of the nature of email marketing nowadays, I've started to detest email. So I can promise you that the email you use to sign up for this membership site will only be used for receipts and also for you to be able to manage access to your membership site, like if you have to change your password or something like that. If you want to be notified about each new video that I post on YouTube, then go ahead and subscribe and turn on the notification bell, and YouTube will let you know. In this membership site though, there is a way to contact me directly. So the only way to be able to do that is to sign up for a seat in this site. But I have curated some questions. It's a form with some questions on it so that I can get the information I need in order to be able to help someone in this area of expertise. All you have to do is click the link in the description and also in the pinned comments. It is also it's everywhere. I'm not trying to hide it from you. So all you have to do is click that link, put in your preferred email. As stated, I promise that is your email for your stuff. I do not want to talk to you over email, but you can access me in this free membership site, and I'm able to share stuff in this site that I can't share on YouTube. For instance, like the no BS guide to a Salesforce CRM, or the mini course on how to think about automations, understanding automations, and other things along the lines of learning how to be a great system administrator, and not only that, but really how to get the bang for your buck with working with a Salesforce consultant, because I know I don't come cheap. So I would much rather help you know exactly what you need before I am tasked with the assignment of figuring it out. So I really enjoyed making all of these videos for you guys, and I hope that you've got some great value out of it. And I can't wait to see you in the Salesforce Captain membership site. See you there.